I drove north from Santa Monica with no plan, no destination. The Pacific sat off my left shoulder, steady and indifferent. The road hugged the coast in that familiar rhythm, with just enough variation to keep you aware. It was one of those rare Los Angeles days after heavy rain. The city had been rinsed clean. The air felt scrubbed, precise, every edge sharpened. The mountains stood in the distance like they had been waiting all along to be noticed. The sky stretched wide in patches of blue, broken only by lingering clouds. Thick, white, suspended like unfinished thoughts. With the top down, the air rushed through the car and over my skin. The sunlight came in fractured beams, landing in patches across the road, across my hands on the wheel, light and shadow taking turns. I had come onto the highway because movement itself felt necessary, as though motion, distance, and open sky were required to understand what had happened. Events remained scattered inside me in disconnected flashes that refused to settle into place. A silhouette near the fire, a hand against my chest, the sound of a voice speaking softly from somewhere close beside me. Certain moments felt unnaturally vivid, while everything between them had vanished into a kind of fog. I kept replaying the fragments as the coastline slipped past beside me, trying to force them into some sensible order. Driving becomes a kind of sorting process. It doesn't resolve or provide closure, it just moves through the debris. The mind tries to narrate events into a coherent story, but the road interrupts. A turn demands attention. A car drifts too close. The ocean flashes into view and then disappears again behind a bluff. You lose the thread. Then you pick it up again, slightly altered. The clouds began to thin, slowly, reluctantly. More gaps appeared, small at first, then wider. The sun pressed through with more confidence, as if finally granted permission. And somewhere along that stretch, between one curve and the next, the noise inside me started to quiet, leaving enough space to notice what remained when everything else stepped aside. My mind circled back to the day before, to the small decisions that did not seem like decisions at the time, to the way an ordinary day can tilt without warning into something else entirely. For days, I had been drifting through a strange malaise. I moved from room to room without purpose, unable to focus on anything for very long. Music failed to hold me. Television and video streams became meaningless noise. Even reading demanded more concentration than I seemed capable of gathering. A heaviness had settled over me. Not quite sadness, not quite exhaustion, but something restless and difficult to name. Without warning, I was overcome by an overwhelming compulsion to step outside and walk. I felt a powerful need to move, as though remaining still for another minute might suffocate me. The late afternoon sky had been undecided, holding its breath beneath layers of bruised gray clouds. By the time I reached Fairfax Avenue, it let go all at once. Rain came down hard. I didn't bring an umbrella. Of course not. No one in Los Angeles owns one in any practical sense. They exist somewhere, in a closet, behind a door, or in the trunk of a car that is no longer yours. You remember owning one the way you remember a childhood address. Vaguely. I acknowledged defeat and ran. And there it was, a used bookstore with a narrow doorway and a handwritten sign. The kind of place that waits to be found by accident or necessity. I stepped inside, the door closing softly behind me. A set of small metallic bells stirred above the frame and released a thin, deliberate chime, signaling my arrival. No one spoke. No one appeared at the register. I was alone. The rain continued its assault outside, loud against the window pane, but inside it shifted into something distant, filtered. The air held that dense, familiar scent of paper, dust, and time. Books that had passed through other hands, other lives, now resting in loose formation, spines leaning, titles half-faded. There's a certain silence in places like that, a kind of suspension. as if conversation had been paused mid-sentence and never resumed. I stood there, not browsing yet, just adjusting, letting the outside drain off me in ways that had nothing to do with water. The place looked as though it had outlived its original purpose. Shelves bowed under the weight of books that looked as if they hadn't been moved in a long time. They bent in long, tired arcs as if each plank had made a private decision to give up just a little more each year. Some leaned forward, some pulled away from the wall. A few had collapsed at one end and stayed that way, the books pressed together so tightly that they held the structure in place by sheer friction. Remove one and the whole thing might sigh, or give way entirely. Sections bled into each other. History drifted into philosophy, philosophy into something obscure or privately printed. Titles appeared where they had no business being, like they had wandered off and decided not to return. The floor carried its own record of time, slight dips where people had stood in the same spot for years, paths worn in by habit. Dust settled in the places no one quite reached. The whole place felt compressed and held together by persistence. Narrow passages cut between the shelves. Some widened just enough to let two people pass if one turned sideways and held their breath. Others closed in without warning, ending in corners that felt less like design and more like accumulation. You could get halfway down a path and realize it narrowed to the point of refusal. You would stop, back up, find the way out again. And there were spaces that were not quite aisles at all. Small pockets carved out by the uneven geometry of stacked books and overworked shelving, nooks that suggested access but resisted it. You could see the space within. Reaching it required gymnastics, a shift of the shoulder, a careful step over something that might once have been a neat pile of books. I found one of those pockets near the back. It narrowed, then folded in on itself, and suddenly I was inside it. It was dim. A single bulb somewhere above and behind me cast a weak, uneven glow that failed to reach the corners. What remained was shadow, thick and concealing. The space felt closed off, claustrophobic. The air had weight. It carried that scent of paper that had stopped trying to preserve itself. I could hear the rain again, fainter, tapping against something outside, like a memory that had not fully let go. Without deciding to, I crouched down, slow and deliberate, as if speed might break something. The bottom shelf sat just above the floor, darker than the rest, less touched, the kind of place where things end up when no one has a better idea of where to put them. I leaned close enough to smell the paper, close enough to see the fine layer of dust that had settled into the edges of the spines. Titles half hidden, some worn down to nothing, others were still legible but no longer relevant to anyone who might have once cared. A wide spine caught my eye. It lay wedged between two books that had long since surrendered their titles to time. I had to angle my head to see it clearly. I could barely make out the title, Picatrix. I pulled it free with care. The surrounding books resisted for a moment as though they were protecting it. When they finally let go, the surrounding dust lifted and settled again. I held the book in both hands, out of caution. The cover was worn, the edges softened. The wear revealed it had passed through several lives before ending up here, in this narrow pocket of a bookstore that barely acknowledged its own existence. When I opened it, I realized the text was entirely in Latin, dense lines of faded ink marching across yellowed pages. It had endured for centuries by passing silently from one curious set of hands to another. Was finding this book a discovery or an interruption? Was it random, or had I stepped into a sequence already in progress and failed to notice until now?
That's a rare one.
The voice was close enough to belong to the space I occupied. I did not hear her approach. No shift of floorboards, no movement of air, just the voice placed behind me as if it had been waiting for the right moment to exist. I turned too quickly. My shoulder brushed the shelf. A few books shifted, then settled back into their compressed agreement. The light caught her only in pieces at first, an outline, a face that seemed to assemble as I looked at it. I didn't hear you, I said, startled, though it came out quietly.
No.
Her hair fell in a long, uninterrupted line, black, deeper than the softened black of a shadow. It absorbed what little light touched it. Her skin was pale to the point of abstraction. She wore a long coat that concealed more than it revealed. It absorbed the dim light, much like her hair did, holding its outline without offering detail, and yet her frame showed through in small ways, in the narrow set of her shoulders. The fabric did not strain or pull. Everything about her looked precise. She appeared delicate, but her bearing suggested she was anything but fragile. Her coat showed no trace of rain. Was she the proprietor, I wondered? Her gaze dropped to the book in my hands, then returned to me, curious and intent. Her gray eyes appeared cold as marble.
Most people never get this far, and if they do, they never think to look down.
I glanced at the shelf, then at the narrow path behind her, trying to reconstruct how she could have entered without leaving any trace of arrival. No answer was offered by the room. I hadn't heard the bells on the door chime. I wasn't looking for anything, I said. She grinned.
That's usually when it appears.
The way she said it reframed the moment, removing any sense of coincidence. I adjusted my grip on the book. It felt heavier now, larger in implication. There was something unusual in the way she spoke, an accent I could not place. Some vowels lingered, while others vanished almost before they were formed. It carried the strange effect of sounding both cultivated and archaic, as though it belonged less to a country than to another time.
You know what that is?
I shook my head. She stepped a fraction closer.
But you know it doesn't belong on that shelf.
I looked down at it again. The worn cover, the softened edges, the quiet insistence of its presence. No, I said, without knowing why. It doesn't. Somewhere beyond the walls, a car passed. For a moment, it drew my attention away, then her gaze pulled it back. I told her the book stood out to me, but I couldn't read it. She tilted her head, studying me intensely for a moment, then she extended her hand.
May I?
I handed her the book. Her fingers closed around it with a kind of familiarity. She turned it once in her hands, as if confirming its balance, then opened the cover with care. The spine resisted slightly, then yielded with a soft, dry sound. Pages shifted. The air in the nook seemed to tighten again.
It's a rare Latin translation of a medieval Arabic text called Gayat al-Hakim, a book of the wise. It gathers the knowledge of the ancients, of the Chaldeans, the Egyptians, and the philosophers concerning the influence of the heavens upon the world below.
She went to a page and held it closer to the weak light, angling it just enough to draw the words out of shadow. Her eyes moved steadily without hesitation, and she began to read aloud.
The wise have said that the beginning of wisdom is the knowledge of the nature of things. Therefore, whoever wishes to attain this knowledge must first understand the causes and the principles from which all things proceed. For all things in this world are bound together by a harmony and a correspondence which the Creator has established among them.
She stopped. The page settled back into silence. The words lingered for a moment, then seemed to withdraw, as if they had only been passing through. She closed the book gently, her hand resting on the cover for a moment, as if acknowledging something that had not been spoken.
You don't need to read Latin. You only need me.
Now her eyes lifted, her gaze aimed squarely at me. Before taking time to examine my thoughts, I blurted, "Would you mind reading more to me over coffee?" She did not answer right away. Her eyes stayed on me, measuring again. Not surprised or amused, just attentive, as if she were listening to something beneath the words, something I had not meant to say out loud.
Coffee.
Yes. A small shift in her posture, almost nothing, but enough to signal movement.
You want to hear it?
I do.
Or you want to understand why you want to hear it?
The distinction felt thin. Both. She nodded. I suggested a cafe around the corner.
I know it.
Of course she did. There was no price on the book, nothing on the inside cover, no penciled mark, no coded tag. I left $20 on the unattended counter. As we left, the bells on the door rang out again, alerting no one. At the cafe, we sat at a small table by the window. The glass held the rain in soft distortion. Drops gathered, merged, and slid down in slow, uneven paths. Outside, the street moved in fragments. It was already dark. Headlights and passing figures broke apart and reformed through the shifting water. She opened the book between us. The light reflecting off the window caught her face in a muted way, pale, steady, untouched by the motion around us. Her voice was low, even. She translated as she went. She recited whole passages without pause. The language transformed in her voice without effort, as if the original and the translation occupied the same space for her. The coffee cooled, untouched. Time thinned. The sound of the rain, the movement of the room, all of it receded behind the cadence of her reading. It became the only structure that mattered. And she stopped abruptly. Her hand remained on the page for a moment, holding it in place. Her eyes lowered, and something in her face changed. It was subtle, a look of confirmation, as if she had reached a point she expected to find. Her voice carried a different weight now.
This is where it begins to speak plainly.
I leaned closer. The text and diagrams remained a mystery to me. Her eyes moved across the lines with a steadiness that suggested familiarity.
There are correspondences between the body and the heavens. These are not metaphorical.
She paused. For the first time since she began reading, her gaze lifted from the page and met mine. There was something fixed in it, a clarity that had not been there before.
Your bones, the very structure of your body, are aligned with Saturn, your thoughts with Mercury, your spirit with the sun.
She rested her hand on mine. The warm contact changed the space between us, narrowing it to a single point. Her voice shifted again, quieter, more direct, as if the words required proximity.
Venus governs your sexual desire. Your body receives and responds.
Her fingers adjusted on my hand, not gripping, but settled more fully as if to deepen the contact. The sensation pulled attention away from everything else. The rain, the room, the passing movement beyond the glass.
Your heart answers the sun. Your mind answers Mercury. What you think is yours is not entirely yours alone.
Her eyes held mine. There was no distance between us now.
This is why intention matters. You're not acting alone. You live close by?
The question came without a shift in tone. I nodded. A few blocks.
Then it's time.
The words landed with quiet authority, as if the decision had already been made and I was only now being informed. She closed the book and stood.
We'll go there.
She said it as if settling something long unresolved. Before I could respond, the cafe, the rain, the conversation, all of it receded into something already finished. I rose without argument. By the time I put my coat on, she was already at the door, waiting. The rain had thinned by the time we reached my apartment. The building was old, not worn out, just settled into its age. The only working elevator was tiny and tucked to one side, like an afterthought or a concession. Once inside, there was little space to stand apart. We were pressed together, and I could feel her breathing against me. After the elevator's compression, my apartment felt almost excessive. The ceiling rose high above. Tall windows climbed the walls, bathed in the soft glow of streetlights from below. She immediately moved toward the windows, the length of her coat following in a quiet line behind her. No wasted motion, no pause to take in the space. She stopped at the glass and stood there. The dim light caught her profile, pale against the dark eastern sky. Her gaze lifted upward, past the rooftops, past the dimming edges of the horizon.
Perfect.
The word barely left her lips when the glass responded. A thin bloom of fog formed where she stood, spreading outward in a soft, uneven circle, thinning at the edges like breath against a mirror in winter. She stood motionless for several seconds, looking upward through the tall panes as if she were listening for something beyond them. Then she turned and looked at me again, deliberately.
The room is right, but it needs fire.
I realized then how cold the apartment had become, or perhaps it had always been cold, and I had only now become aware of it. "There's wood by the fireplace," I said.
I know.
The answer settled oddly in me. I moved toward the hearth while she remained by the windows. The apartment suddenly felt unfamiliar in small ways. The dimensions felt altered by her presence. I crouched beside the fireplace and opened the iron screen. The old smell of ash and cedar drifted out. I stacked the logs carefully, conscious that every sound seemed amplified. The dry knock of wood against brick, the rustle of paper beneath the kindling, the metallic scrape of the lighter wheel. The fire caught slowly at first. Thin orange veins moved through the paper, then widened into flame. The wood answered with soft cracks and faint settling sounds. Warm light began to climb the walls in uneven patterns. I stood and brushed ash from my hands. "Would you like a drink?" No answer. I turned. She was no longer standing at the windows. For a brief instant, the apartment felt as if it were emptied of oxygen. I looked toward the hallway leading deeper inside, dark, silent. Then I heard the faint sound of fabric moving somewhere beyond the bedroom doorway. I followed the sound with my eyes just as she emerged again. She carried the comforter from my bed, folded loosely in her arms, with 2 pillows balanced effortlessly against it. I stared at her. "You found the bedroom quickly." A faint smile touched her mouth, though it carried no amusement.
Your apartment is not difficult to understand.
She crossed the room barefoot now. At some point, she had removed her shoes without my noticing. The floorboards gave quiet responses beneath her steps. Without asking permission, she lowered the comforter near the tall windows. She spread it across the floor in a slow, deliberate motion, arranging it directly where the firelight and the dim glow from the city met together against the glass. She placed the 2 pillows side by side at one end. Outside, the rain had stopped entirely. The clouds had thinned enough to reveal fragments of stars above Los Angeles, faint and scattered. The fire behind us deepened, throwing long, moving shadows across the ceiling. Then, with slow, deliberate movements, she removed her coat and let it fall beside the comforter. Beneath it, she wore a cream-colored dress that ended just above her knees, simple, softly fitted. The pale fabric caught the firelight in warm, shifting tones. After the severity of the dark coat, the sight of it altered the room again. She sat first, folding herself down onto the comforter with unusual grace. The dress settled softly across her thighs as she drew her legs beneath her slightly, the fabric gathering in gentle folds above her knees. She looked up at me.
We should remain near the windows.
I still held the untouched bottle and glasses in my hands. Somehow they now felt irrelevant. "You never answered about the drink," I said.
You already know I'm not here for that.
Again, the sensation returned that she was always slightly ahead of the conversation, arriving before the words themselves. I set the glasses aside, untouched. When I joined her on the comforter, she opened the book once more across her lap. The firelight moved across the old pages in restless gold patterns. Strange diagrams surfaced briefly from the shadow and vanished again. For a while, she did not read. She simply rested her fingertips lightly against one of the pages while looking out toward the sky. The room had become unnaturally quiet. Even the city noise below seemed distant now, muted.
You feel it already.
It was not phrased as a question. "Yes," I admitted.
What does it feel like?
I searched for words and failed to find accurate ones, like something is waiting. Her eyes shifted toward me slowly, pale gray, reflective in the firelight. She glanced at the eastern sky again. Then she began reading. Her voice sounded different here on the floor beside the windows. lower, more intimate.
The heavens do not compel the soul, but they incline it. They bend it toward certain hungers, certain destinies, certain unions.
The fire cracked sharply behind us.
There are meetings that occur before the participants understand they have agreed to them. Sometimes years before.
I watched her as she read, the calm certainty in her face, the strange composure she carried like a second skin. Nothing about her seemed accidental, not her arrival in the bookstore, not the rain, not the book, not this. You speak as though all this was planned, I said quietly. She looked at me over the edge of the page. Her gaze drifted upward again toward the dark glass and the faint stars beyond it.
Tonight, certain alignments have returned.
What followed refuses to arrange itself into a clean sequence in my memory. Even now, recalling it feels less like remembering events and more like reaching into a dark liquid where fragments drift beneath the surface. Pieces rise, others vanish before I can hold them. The entire night exists inside a strange haze, dreamlike and narcotic, as though I had been drawn under the influence of something far older and deeper than desire alone. I remember the fire burning lower. I remember her voice continuing softly beside me, while the book remained open across her lap, though at some point I stopped understanding whether she was still reading from the pages or speaking from memory. The words no longer seemed separate from her. The room itself changed, or perhaps my perception of it had changed. The firelight pulsed against the tall windows. Shadows moved slowly across the ceiling like dark water. Outside, the city diminished, until only the sky remained. I remember my fingers touching her face, then her throat, then lower. The cream-colored dress disappeared somewhere into the shifting dark beside us, not suddenly, slowly, as if it had been intended all along that it would leave her body. Pale skin revealed itself in fragments against the firelight, and I could feel the orderly machinery of thought beginning to give way to something irrational and deeply consuming. Her movements carried no uncertainty, no hesitation. She guided every moment forward with calm precision. My own clothes followed. I remember her hands undressing me with almost ceremonial patience, neither hurried nor tender, but deliberate, as though clothing itself had become an obstruction to something already in motion long before we met. The pillows shifted beneath us, the comforter tangled around our legs. I remember her pulling me toward her body, not inviting, not asking, pulling. I found myself flat on my back, staring upward as shadows moved across the ceiling above us. The sensation remains vivid even through the haze. The warmth of her skin, the impossible closeness of her breath against my ear. Her hair falling across my chest and shoulders like dark silk while her voice continued speaking softly into me, around me, through me.
Face east.
At first I did not understand. Then her hands guided me gently but firmly until we turned together toward the windows and the thin spread of stars above Los Angeles. A few planets burned among the sparse field of light beyond the glass, small, ancient, steady. Her lips moved against my ear.
Venus is rising.
Her hand slid below my chest.
And Mercury.
The words entered me with strange force. They seemed to alter the rhythm of my breathing, my pulse, my thoughts themselves. I could no longer separate her voice from the movement of our bodies or from the faint lights beyond the glass. The room dissolved into fragments after that. Firelight, skin, the cold surface of the windows nearby. Her breath catching softly against my neck, the steady cadence of her voice continuing without interruption.
Your body answers, your spirit follows. Do not resist it.
Her words folded into sensation until I no longer knew whether I was listening or falling. I remember the overwhelming feeling of being drawn downward and outward at the same time, into her body, into her words, into the strange celestial geometry she insisted had opened above us. My thoughts unraveled completely. Time ceased behaving normally, seconds expanded, Entire stretches vanished. At some point, I became aware of the stars again through the glass. I could see Venus, low and impossibly bright, Mercury nearby. Their distant alignment seemed to pulse directly through my body and into hers. She held me tighter then. I remember her whispering something in a language I did not recognize, then my name, though I had never given it to her. Then nothing coherent at all, only sensation, heat, motion, the dizzying certainty that I had crossed into something irreversible. And when climax finally overtook me, it did not feel physical alone. It felt catastrophic, total, like the sudden severing of consciousness from the body itself. The last thing I remember is her voice close against my ear, calm and certain even then.
You see now.
After that, darkness swallowed everything. When I woke, morning light filled the apartment in a pale, washed-out gray, drained of the intensity the room had carried the night before. For several moments, I could not understand where I was or why my body felt so heavy. My thoughts moved sluggishly, as though they had traveled a great distance to return to me. Then I became aware of the floor beneath me, the comforter, the cold air against my skin. I was naked, lying alone near the tall eastern windows. The fire in the fireplace had collapsed into ash hours ago. Thin ribbons of smoke still lingered faintly in the room, carrying the stale scent of burned cedar and extinguished flame. I sat up too quickly. My head swam. At first, I expected to hear movement elsewhere in the apartment, the soft sound of water running, a floorboard shifting in the bedroom, something ordinary that would restore proportion to the night. There was nothing. The apartment had become completely still. I stood and searched anyway. No coat hanging anywhere, no shoes near the door, no dress, no trace of her except the disordered comforter and the faint, lingering scent that remained trapped within its folds. Something subtle and unfamiliar. Smoke, perhaps, or perfume, or something older I could not place. She was gone. The book, too. I stood near the windows again, looking out over the morning city while fragments of the night drifted through me in broken flashes. Her voice near my ear, the firelight moving across her pale skin, the pressure of her hands guiding me eastward, Venus rising, Mercury rising. The words no longer felt entirely symbolic. Even in daylight, they clung to me with disturbing weight, as though something had occurred beyond the boundaries of ordinary intimacy, something ritualistic, something precise. And yet the details resisted examination. Each attempt to hold the memory clearly caused parts of it to dissolve. The night remained fractured, suspended inside that narcotic haze. Was it a visitation or a dream shaped from flesh and firelight and planetary motion? I could no longer tell where one ended and the other began. I touched the cold glass of the eastern windows where she had stood the night before. For a brief moment, I thought I could still feel the faint warmth of her breath there. The ocean remained to my left in long stretches. Traffic moved unevenly, fast for several minutes, then slowing abruptly without explanation. I had left the apartment an hour earlier, yet the events of the evening still clung to me. The memory of her, the sensation of her. At a stoplight, I suddenly caught traces of her voice returning without warning, low against my ear.
Face east.
I remembered fragments of skin illuminated by firelight and felt a strange dizziness move through me again, as though part of my body had not fully returned from the night before. The worst part was the uncertainty. Did it happen exactly as I remembered? Or had exhaustion, desire, and whatever strange current surrounded her transformed an ordinary encounter into something mythic inside my own mind? The traffic ahead thickened, suddenly near Malibu. Brake lights multiplied in long red chains along the coast. Cars slowed to a crawl. I leaned forward slightly, trying to see the source of the congestion ahead, but the curve of the highway concealed everything beyond several hundred yards. Construction, perhaps, or an accident. I leaned forward and switched on the radio. Static burst briefly through the speakers before an AM station settled into place beneath the hiss, the familiar compressed sound filling the car. A commercial for a personal injury attorney was coming to an end. Another advertisement followed. Replacement windows, a mattress sale in Van Nuys, a cheerful voice discussing reverse mortgages with almost supernatural optimism. I waited impatiently while traffic continued inching forward beside the ocean. Then the station returned to its afternoon programming.
And now a quick look at traffic and weather together.
The announcer's voice carried the smooth, detached tone unique to radio broadcasters, calm regardless of catastrophe. A stalled vehicle on Topanga. Congestion downtown near the 110 interchange. Nothing substantial on the coast. No accident. No closure. The report ended. I almost switched the radio off again, pausing when the anchor's voice returned with faint amusement.
In other news, astronomers and skywatchers across Southern California reported unusually clear conditions overnight following yesterday's storm, allowing rare visibility of what experts are calling an uncommon planetary alignment in the eastern sky.
My hand froze near the dial.
The event involved Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, appearing together along the ecliptic just before dawn. Astronomers say alignments involving 5 visible planets are uncommon, particularly with Mercury visible so close to the horizon under favorable atmospheric conditions.
Traffic crawled forward another few feet. Outside, waves struck the shoreline below the highway.
According to researchers interviewed this morning, the same alignment will not occur again until 2040.
The voice continued speaking. Something about observatories, viewing conditions, orbital mechanics. I barely heard it now. My hands tightened slowly around the steering wheel. Her voice returned with haunting clarity.
Venus rising, Mercury rising.
It was no longer a memory, but a presence. The eastern windows, the firelight, her breath against my ear. I suddenly became aware of my own reflection in the windshield, calm and faintly smiling in the soft gray light of the coast. And as the traffic finally began moving and the Pacific unspooled endlessly beside me, I became aware that the strange malaise which had gripped me for days was gone entirely, burned away and replaced by something fierce and electric. I felt unnaturally awake and alive in a way I had not experienced in years. With that awakening came the growing suspicion that I had never merely been seduced by a mysterious woman for a single night, but drawn deliberately into some recurring alignment of flesh, planets, and will that had begun long before I ever stepped into that bookstore.